Welcome to the Good Food CFO podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Delevan, and with me, as always, is our producer, Chelsea Steer.
Hey, Sarah, do you want to start today off with a review?
I love starting off with a review.
Okay, great. So this review is again from Apple Podcasts. It comes from Cocoa Bee Nut.
Hmm.
And they said it is a must listen for any small food business. Relevant and transparent, this podcast asks the right questions and finds the truth about what we all want to know. There's so much information here that can steer a business founder in the right direction.
Hmm. Reviews are so awesome to hear. Thank you, Cocoa Peanut. I don't know who this is. I feel like if you're a member of our community that, I've been in contact with, kind of message us and let us know
Yeah.
who you really are. But thank you. We love reviews. They're always so great to hear. As you've said before, Chelsea, like it helps us know we're on the right path, that the content we're providing is content that you all want to hear. It is also one of the number one ways that you can help us to grow this podcast. Algorithms are a thing. So the more reviews, the more ratings that we have on Apple Podcasts in particular helps other good food founders find our show and is super helpful for us as well as enjoyable. So if you haven't yet and you've been enjoying the show, we really would love it if you could leave a review. Put your business name there. We will shout you out here on the podcast when we read the review. It's fun and we're super grateful.
Yeah. And it is, like you said, the one of the number one ways to help. And it is the number one no cost way to help
Yes.
us and to support this podcast. So thank you for doing the plug for me. We will absolutely shout out your business. So leave that info in your review and just thank you for your support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chelsea, I'm excited about today's podcast because it's an kind of like an Ask Me Anything. It's an Ask the Good Food CFO podcast episode. I feel like it's the first one we've done in a while. And it's the first with our sort of new membership name with our BABOYOT members. And it was really fun to record.
Yeah, it was super fun to record. And what I felt like was a little different here and exciting was that we had, like you said, our BABOYOT members together for the first time. And they really got to dig into some gritty questions with you, right? Which you're going to hear in this episode.
Yeah, we had a couple questions that were submitted prior to the live. And then we had one member who is a founder, co-founder, I guess I should say, who had like some specific questions. And we got to chat and do a little bit of coaching actually on the podcast.
Yeah, it was a really fun event. And I can't wait to do our next one. I think that'll come up in Q3. So probably like in July. So if you're not a BABOYOT member yet, and after listening to this episode, you're dying to join us for the next Ask the Good Food CFO event, you can find out more information about becoming a member on our website. Just visit thegoodfoodcfo.com and click on membership. But Sarah, before we get into that episode, I want to talk about an article that I read that came from Food Business News. And I thought it was a really interesting article for us to talk about because there's a lot of like themes going on here, kind of touches, the conversation we had about Foxtrot. It touches conversations we've had about, really understanding and knowing your customer. And then ultimately touches some of the bigger conversations we've been having around cash flow, growth, and investment.
Yeah.
As I said, this article comes from Food Business News, and we're going to link to it down in our show notes. It was called Last Call, Sacred Serve Serves Up Last Pints. And it is highlighting the story of Sacred Serve, which is a brand that made plant-based gelato and has recently had to close their doors, citing a couple of reasons that we're going to talk through, as we talk about this article. The number one reason that they cited was a declining plant-based market.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think we've been hearing this in the news, I think especially like with Impossible Meats and sort of those what would you call them, like the first brands that really got a lot of funding and we're really kind of pioneering this new wave of plant-based products, if you will. they've seen declining sales, right? They continue to have losses. And so the decline of the plant-based market is not something that is news to me. But I think what is interesting is, as the article points out, there was not a lack of a strong customer base for this product. But when you're selling into big retail, you don't have a lot of control over whether or not your product stays on shelf, right? There's a lot to be said about volume and how your or velocity, right? And how your velocity compares to another option that could
Yeah.
be in your place, right? And this article cites that when, sort of the plant-based sector, right, was like on the rise, it was very trendy, there was a lot of investment, there were multiple slots of
Mm-hmm.
plant-based ice cream being allotted in a store. And now some of those slots are going back to what I'll call real dairy,
Yeah.
right? And the founder says, like, it's not old school dairy, it's more in the sustainable and regenerative, you know, dairy space. But if the plant-based products, sales are declining, and the buyers in the store are realizing, hey, there's a new trend rising, and we are not seeing the returns we used to with this plant-based, we're going to start getting rid of our lowest sellers and bring
Mm-hmm.
in something else that looks more promising. Because as we talked about in, I believe, last episode's news story, we have to always keep in mind our customers' business, right? And so the business model of the retailer is that they need to move product. Their margins are small, they need high velocity. And so if you're not achieving that, they can't keep you on shelf. I don't know exactly what went on. We've not spoken to the founder, but one of the things that they say is that it was a combination of a lack of capital, being over leveraged with a national launch, and seeing a big decline in the plant-based category as a whole. They also cite that, as we've talked about here, capital became very expensive, both on the debt and the equity side. And
Mm-hmm.
as an early stage company, we were reliant on that. So here's what this says to me. This says to me, they weren't a profitable business, right? They didn't have a financially sustainable model when they went to a national launch. A national launch, even if you had a financially sustainable model on a smaller scale, is going to take a lot of external investment. And I think perhaps something that is a parallel to Foxtrot is when they use this term over leveraged,
Mm-hmm.
expenses were too high, right? It's just too much money. It was kind of like they went too far out. And in my head, it's like an oh shoot moment. Like, we're not going to be able to keep doing this. And I think perhaps by the time that was realized, and again, I'm just kind of thinking about it from like what I think maybe could have happened, is like a bit too late. But here's the thing. Business is all about taking risk. And these founders, as you read through the article, or this founder made decisions based on market trend, right? Things were
Mm-hmm.
trending upward when this product launched. They had the opportunity to get into national. They did it. It seems like they had access to capital in the beginning, right? But then the market changed. And I recall the episode with Melissa from City Capital where she explicitly says, I feel bad for founders now.
Yeah.
Because in very recent years, what we were
2019.
what they were being told was that there's money for you, and margin doesn't matter, and cash flow doesn't matter, and we want to give you money, and debt is easy to come by and it's easy to afford. And if you run out of money, you just, get more debt to pay
Get
off
more
the debt
money.
that you
Yeah.
already have. This business was founded in the time of easy money
Yeah.
and an upward swing in, plant-based, product sales. Basically everything around her changed, and then we're seeing the results, right?
Yeah. And as a first time entrepreneur, she's actually quoted in the article talking about how surprised she was at how capital reliant food businesses actually are and need to be in order to survive.
Yeah. And I mean, we talk a lot about right sizing, right? So, like, the amount of capital reliance that your business has can be determined by you, right?
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that the founder says is that the only way to survive would have been to have more time, i.e., a longer runway from a financial perspective. And I believe we've talked about this here on the show. We often create models for people where we're figuring out how much money is it going to take until we hit the point of profitability, the point of positive cash flow, right? And most founders don't know that. And when you go big into national distribution and you don't have a an understanding, a good estimate of what the investment is going to be and what the, let's say, monthly unit sales number is that tips you into profitability and cash flow sustainability, it's very hard to get there. It's very hard to be resilient. It makes sometimes getting money even harder because if you don't know where that point is, it's hard to convince, someone else where that point is.
Yeah.
Um, and I've said this before for sure on the show. Our mission is to have good food businesses stay in business for as long as possible, right? We, as a revolution, right, as a good food revolution, as a group of founders and consultants and industry members who want to see our food industry change, we need businesses to be financially successful. And so this is an unfortunate story. Sometimes things are just going to not work out the way you thought, and things come to an end, and sometimes you just have to be okay with that, right? It's not
Yeah.
and I want to put that in perspective, right? The closing of this business hopefully is not the end of the world for its founder. They land on their feet hopefully and have a successful career in some other way. I mean, I've had a failed business, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like
Yeah.
it worked out for the best, you know? So, but just like with Foxtrot, I think there are things that we can learn here. And if you want to avoid an outcome like this, I think knowing, getting a sense of what is I'll call it the runway to profitability. How many years is this going to take? How much capital is it going to take to create the kind of business that I want to create? You're better set up to succeed.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Sarah, thanks for your take on that story. And I'm ready to jump in and have our audience hear your take on some other stories and questions.
Yeah, I'm excited for people to hear. This was a super fun episode. And as we said earlier, I'm excited to do it again. So yeah, let's get to it.
All right.
As a good food founder, do you ever feel like your work is done in a silo? Is it difficult to feel confident in your business and financial decisions because you don't have a sounding board? Well, in our weekly CFO office hours, you'll not only get the chance to work shoulder to shoulder with the Good Food CFO herself, Sarah Delevan, but also with a small group of your peers. Together, you can support each other through the work of building a business on your own terms. Passes are available now on our website. Just visit thegoodfoodcfo.com and click on services. And now back to the show.
So, Sarah, today you are going to be answering some listener questions, and we are joined by some of our BABOYOT members to ask those questions. I want to introduce the member that we have with us live here today. Chris, welcome.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your company?
Sure. Yeah. So my name's Chris Gilmour, and I'm here representing Wild Muskoka Botanicals. We're up in Ontario, Canada. Website's www.wildmuskoka.com if you want to check that out. And, the short story of our business, my wife actually started about 8 years ago. We're outdoors folks and foragers. My wife started this whole product line around sustainably wild forage foods and drinks. So we do actually like drink bitters and cocktail bitters. We do an elderberry syrup, and spices, fun stuff like that. We started off, just selling at a couple local retailers and doing some markets. And now we're really trying to grow our direct to consumer through online sales. And we just got in with a distributor. And that's where I've got some big questions popping up. And I'm excited to chat with Sarah about those.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Chris, so much for being here. And we are definitely going to get to those questions. But first, we actually had a few members that were not able to join us, Sarah, and they submitted questions ahead of time. And I know there was one in particular that touched on something we talked about in a recent episode that you definitely wanted to answer. So let's jump in.
Yeah. So this question came in regard, as you kind of hinted at, to our Foxtrot episode. And I'm going to look down and read this question here verbatim, so I want to get it right. They said, first of all, I love case studies, so we're so glad to get that feedback. But then the member asks, you mentioned that during Foxtrot's last fundraising, they did debt financing. I'm a little confused because isn't most financing debt financing? And the answer to that question is yes, in the sense that financing of all kinds is typically intended to be paid back. So there is a form of debt, right? When someone gives you money and there's an expectation that it will be paid back. But there's a little bit of a difference and a specific reason for why we use the term debt financing versus the other term we used in that episode, which was equity financing. So when we say debt financing, that refers to a more traditional or conventional, if you will, loan through like a bank or the SBA, where you're going to have an interest rate. You're going to have a fixed monthly payment, right? That you're going to be paying back over a certain amount of time. Versus equity financing, which involves securing capital in exchange for a percentage of ownership in the business.
Mm-hmm.
In that kind of relationship, there is an expectation that there's a certain percentage of ownership that an individual will receive in exchange for the funding that they have provided. But how that gets paid out will vary. It might not get paid out for X number of years, from the time the investment is made. It may be a percentage of profitability, right? It may be something that looks more like a shareholder distribution, depending on how many equity, partners you have, if you will. So that's sort of the core difference between what we're talking about when we say debt financing versus what we're talking about when we say equity financing. And I'll add to that the reason that was interesting in the Foxtrot episode is because we wanted to sort of emphasize that there was a lot of equity funding, right? Up to a certain point, and then debt funding was taken on. And so it was an interesting point for us to go, the type of funding changed. And we don't know why, and we don't know if that says anything significant about their financial state, but for us, it sort of implied that something has changed here. They need additional money and they're not doing another round of equity funding. They've gone to a more traditional type of funding.
Seeming sort of like they like you said, they needed more funding, but either maybe don't want to or don't have the equity necessarily to give.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Sarah, we have another question that was submitted beforehand by a member who was unable to be here today. And if you don't mind, I'll read it for you now.
I would love for you to do that.
Okay. This question is, I listened to the episode where you broke down the 40, 50, 60% margin, and I can see that I need to improve my margin, but I'm not sure where to start. Do you have any advice?
That is such a great question. And first, I want to say, congrats, or great job on digging into your numbers. If you can see that you need to increase your margin, I think getting a sense of how much is potentially a good place to start. For example, if you feel like I could really benefit, or my financial situation would change, meaning my cash flow situation would change if I was operating at 10% higher margin, for example. That's a good thing to know, just so you have a target in mind. You may not actually be able to get there, but I think having a sense of where you need to be is going to be helpful. Then, of course, I would go to some of our tools, I can't help but recommend them. Then I would say dig into the cost of your product, right? We never want to go to increasing price as the first option. Sometimes it's not possible to do. We've had several conversations, as you know, Chelsea, on this podcast where we've talked about being at the price ceiling, right? So to speak, and not wanting to price our customers out of being able to buy our product. So I always like to go to the ingredients, the packaging, really analyze, is there something here that is costing more than what it needs to? The episode we did with Ingredient Brothers, right, the co-founder of that organization, he really dives into how you can think about, is it worth it, right, for us to put this type of sugar in our product, or, this type of, flavoring in the product? Is it really impacting the consumer? Is it really impacting the product? So really analyzing, dare I say, from an unemotional place, the inputs of your product. We've also seen, especially in the good food space, when we have sustainable packaging and that can really get up in cost. So analyzing your packaging, not to say that you want to go unsustainable. I would never recommend that to somebody, but just analyzing, maybe can we reduce the colors in our packaging? Can we modify the design? Like, there's lots of solutions to things if we want to kind of first tackle what the possibilities are for reducing the cost of our product without impacting how it looks on the shelf, and of course, the quality and the flavor to our consumer. You might not have any wiggle room there either. It's just a first stop for like where to go and look. And then I think the next step is efficiencies. Are you utilizing or maximizing, right, the efficiencies with which you can create your product? Where are the bottlenecks? Well, shout out another episode when we talked with Charlotte Walters, several seasons ago. She really helped us to understand, how can I look at my production and where can I identify how I might improve, to increase efficiencies? Because if our labor cost per unit goes down, that can be a significant savings for people. So I don't want to go too far, down the road, but I think that's the sort of the first few places that I would go.
Yeah, I love that answer. I love the idea of like really looking and seeing, where do you have room? What can you maybe move around, right? And I do want to go back and shout out that Charlotte episode again, because I think it deserves it, especially the bonus one that included the time study.
Yes.
Because I think that doing a time study as a production nerd myself was such a cool thing to learn about. And I think she laid out a manner through which you can get really clear on what it really takes to make your product.
Yeah. I think something that's popping into my head right now too is like, this is like what might be considered the boring work, right? Like, sometimes people avoid digging into this. They're like, my product is my product and like my margins are my margins. And so I want to reinforce like how awesome it is that this founder is asking this question and saying, I need a higher margin. And that might be because they need improved cash flow, because they might not have additional funds to invest in their business to get them to what we've been calling the tipping point, right? Where they're able to operate financially sustainably. And so it's so important to dig into this work. And I'll shout out another episode, Jason from Deo Water, like his approach to not only understanding his costs and his margins, but then also coupling that with when and where he can advance his business into new channels, right? And so that's another great episode to listen to, because if you can't change any of the costs that we just mentioned or improve your efficiencies, maybe there's a channel mismatch. And so maybe it's about right-sizing your business, maybe pulling back somewhere. But I would say start with those first areas, that we mentioned, and then you can go from there.
Yes, and good luck in all of that work, because there's a lot of levers that you can pull.
Yeah.
So, Chris, you actually submitted a question for the event today. So I'm going to give you the floor.
Yeah, so we're taking a bit of a big leap right now in that we're going to be onboarding with a distributor this fall for the first time. And I actually have a million questions around that. It feels a little nerve-wracking, and I'll follow up on some of those later. I guess the first one I'm kind of thinking about is like, how do we start to map out a marketing budget as we begin to onboard new stores. I want to do some planning right now. I have the opportunity to actually do some grant writing to potentially even help with some funding for this, but I don't really even know where to start. Like, do I budget a per store amount? Yeah, I'm really looking for some thoughts on a marketing budget.
That's such a great question. I have some questions in return, if that's okay, to just kind of get things started here. So perfect. So with this distributor that you're onboarding with, I ventured to guess that you have a sense of the types of stores that you will be moving into. And so my first question is, do you have a sense of the types of promotions or anything that those stores would require of you or request of you?
Yeah, I have a little bit of an idea. I mean, we're kind of targeting kind of like small mom and pop health food stores and then
Okay.
kind of like mid-sized chains.
Okay.
We actually don't want to go into the big stores. I don't know that we ever actually want to be in the big stores.
Okay.
But like the health food store that have like the chain of like 4 or 5 of them around a region kind of.
Yeah.
So with those larger clients, I definitely know there's like print ads where you could, you have to pay obviously for print ads. Some of them have like paid like e-blast that you can do. Sampling, of course, is a big one. I think some of the smaller stores probably don't run print ads.
Yeah.
One thing I've even thought about is like, do you run paid social media, but like in a region directing people to a store? Like we've done that for our online store before. I don't know about whether it makes sense to actually run it to a specific store. We're also, I should mention, we're only doing this with one product as far as the
Okay.
distributor. So they're only taking on one of our products.
Okay, so this is all helpful information. So I'm sort of channeling our good friend Felice Thorpe here, who I think is such an amazing resource. We actually did a podcast episode. I'm shouting out so many podcast episodes today. We'll link to it in the show notes, Chris, and then we'll send it to you directly. But she talked about a marketing budget and she talked about this sense of like, some founders think you have to go with a certain percentage, like, oh, CPG brands have and I'm pulling this from thin air, an 18% marketing budget, right? When they're going through distribution. In case you missed it, Chris is experiencing a thunderstorm while we're recording. So we
And
thank you for
flashes of
being here.
lightning.
Yeah, like in the background. So if you're watching on YouTube, it's intense and enjoyable being from LA and not having many thunderstorms.
So it's kind of fun.
Yeah. I feel like we're by a campfire a little bit too. But so first and foremost, I want to say you don't have to have some certain percentage of your revenue assigned to your marketing budget, right? Felice and I both have a similar approach where I think it's called like the bottom up or the $0, like, budget marketing approach, where we say, what are we trying to achieve first? Right. So when we know what we want to achieve, we can then say, okay, what are the tactics that we can employ to achieve that? And then what are the costs associated with those tactics? So you said something that I want to pinpoint here first, and that is that you've done paid social for your online store. So I want to ask, was that effective? And did you get a good result from those paid social ads?
It's a hard one to measure. So we actually did get a little bit of grant funding to help with us, and we invested quite a bit of money in the like testing and stuff. But now I do think we actually have a pretty primed algorithm, and we were running profitable ads by the end. Now, it was during the Christmas holiday season, so I don't know whether those ads would have actually been profitable year round. One of the issues we're trying to fix with our business is we make almost all of our revenue in the last quarter of the year during holiday. Part of this expanding this one product is trying to actually increase our income throughout the kind of winter and spring and fall. So we're not kind of running a deficit for 3 quarters of the year, hoping we're going to make it all back with a big quarter. That's pretty stressful.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we were able to turn the ads profitable after investing a fair bit into just like tweaking and playing with them.
Yeah.
But it was very specific to the shopping season for the holiday. So it would be a little different trying to do it for this specific product to a store.
Well, what I would say is that if you've learned something. So again, I'm channeling Felice here a little bit, but you're never going to know exactly what is going to work and what's going to produce a result until you try it. So what you've done is essentially you've invested money, you've done the work, and you identified that during the holiday season, running these online ads to the online store worked and was able to be profitable. So I would say around the holiday in particular, it might make sense to also run additional ads that are localized, right, to those stores to help drive sales there and to see if you can replicate the same types of outcome in terms of driving people to buy at the store. In regard to increasing the revenue outside of the holiday season, I'm venturing to guess that we might need to drive trial. Are you familiar with that terminology?
No.
So drive trial means get new people to try your product who've never had it before, or who may like see it on the shelf and be interested, but not be like ready to take a chance on it or willing to take a chance on it. So when we say drive trial, it means getting that first time buyer to make that first purchase. And this is especially important when you're on a retail shelf, especially for the first time, right? We need that product to move. And so this is where you might do something like a discount or a promotion with the store. And you're not going to do it all of the time, but you're going to do it in order to do that, drive the trial. So let's just say you do like a 20% off or a 15% off, right? Someone who otherwise might be like, I'm not familiar with this product, but I want to try it. They're going to see that sale. They're going to give it a try. And if they fall in love with it, as I assume they would, they will become a repeat buyer. And that's the objective.
We're in a couple retailers locally. Well, we're actually probably in about 10 to 12 retailers right now.
Okay.
A few of them do really, really well. But there are hometown retailers where, one, a lot of people know us, and two, like everybody in the store is championing our product. So
right.
Everybody that comes in, they're like, hey, you need this.
Yeah.
And we've gone into a number of stores outside our community, and the results they're a fraction of what we're getting in our hometown stores, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So my thought is like, how do we figure out how to scale that? Which, that's maybe a whole nother bigger conversation. But I guess the question is like, how do I set a budget to even start to experiment with how to scale that?
Well, my brain immediately goes to knowing your margin on your product through distribution, right? So, and I'm just going to pick numbers here. Let's say you're at 50% margin on the product itself as it's being sold to the distributor. If then you're going to offer a certain percentage off of that product for a little while, right? You need to make some assumptions on how much product do I think I'm going to move and be selling at a discount, and factor that into part of your budget. And then you might say, okay, we might do a promotion in the summer. We might do a promotion like multiple times a year, right? To get people to buy in the low seasons, just in general. And if you're, and you're going to have to do your best to estimate, which is the scariest thing for founders to do, right? But it's just part of the process. You're not going to get it 100% right. But the more planning you do, the more math you do, and the more you pay attention to how is this turning out, the better. So let's say you feel comfortable, and I'm making up numbers, but let's say you feel comfortable doing a 20% promo, 20% off, and you agree with the stores you're going to do it for 2 weeks. And let's say you base it off of the movement in your current stores. It might be too high, right? Than what you'll actually move, but it'll give you a sense of what it will cost you to run that promotion. You run that promotion with that budget and you see how it goes. Did product actually move? And if the answer is no, then don't do that again.
Yeah.
Do something else, right? So there's a lot of trial and error in this.
Yeah. I feel like I need to set aside some money beyond the sale though too, to play with, like, like the print ads, the I don't know, like, sending sample bottles to stores, whatever else ideas.
Yeah. So I'm always very clear with the fact that like I'm not of the marketing mind.
Yeah.
I do, right? So as far as the ideas go, right? I think the main message I have for you is, what is the outcome you're trying to achieve? Definitely driving trial because you're going into new stores. Awareness, it sounds like, is another one that you're working on. So what are the ways you're going to create awareness in these new areas? And if print ads is part of that, then definitely set aside a budget for that. And then my main, and the total budget is going to depend on your cash on hand, right? And your ability to invest in spending money. And you pick, I think for you and just kind of starting out, my advice would be to pick very strategic things that you believe will get you the outcomes that you're looking for. If they do, amazing, repeat them until they don't work anymore. And if they don't work, then maybe tweak it and try again, right? or kind of abandon that and move on to the next thing. I'm never going to say to someone, you should set a $10,000 budget or you should set an X dollar amount budget, because it's not going to translate from business to business. It's
Right.
going to depend on where you are and what you're, like I keep saying, what you're trying to achieve.
Cool. Yeah. I'm just sitting
Yeah.
with that, thinking about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a kind of a frustrating answer, I venture to say, because it's like it depends, right? And people
Yeah.
hate it, understandably, when I say it depends. If you and I were working together one-on-one, the conversation could look a little bit different, because it would be like, okay, we see what your revenue is. We see what your operating, profit or losses are. We can see how much money we have in the bank. Maybe we get a sense then of, we can't go over X amount of dollars, right? Like
Yeah.
there might be, right? There's like perhaps a ceiling to what we can spend. And within that, we then say, so that's the other way you could do it, is go, well, here's what I know I can't go beyond, because I just simply won't have the money. If the revenue, if there's no return on my marketing investment, this is the maximum that I could afford. That's another way to look at it. And then you go, okay, now maybe you do have $10,000. You say, how do I make that $10,000 have the most impact possible? So again, you're picking the tactics and the strategies that you believe are going to have an impact, and then you're kind of keeping track. I'm of the worst case scenario mind. So it's like, what can I spend and assume that this isn't going to work? And then if you spend it and it works, great, your marketing budget just got bigger, right? And then you can kind of keep spending on the things that work to generate that return on investment.
Yeah, cool. An idea just popped into my head, if I can run it by you really
Of
quick.
course.
I actually just worked with your profit margin calculator for the first time. I bought that last week and ran our numbers through it.
Cool.
And I do think that they actually are pretty good, although I want to follow up with you about that on at another time.
Sure.
But what I was kind of thinking, before I used your calculator, I kind of had worked backwards and kind of come up with like our cost of goods and then like a percentage for like marketing and sales. Now we haven't actually tracked that and applied it in any meaningful way, but I've just like, I had it in a spreadsheet. So like, let's just assume, if I was just to pick and say, we know that we can afford 20% in sales and marketing above and beyond our cost of goods sold. Like if we know we have that in our budget, could I look at, let's say I get a new store and be like, okay, well, I want to get up to selling like 3 cases a week. I think that's realistic in this market, or 2 cases a week. And then I times that by like our 3 months that are the heaviest thing. And then kind of take 20% of that and be like, well, as a trial, I'm going to invest 20% of my ideal sales with this store over this period into marketing for this quarter. Is there any logic to like a strategy like that to you, or am I making it too complex? Or
I don't think you're making it too complex. I think number one, you've thought through a methodology, which in and of itself is a good first step, right? Yeah. However you approach it, I think is okay, right? It needs to make sense to you. And I know that math works different for every human. Like you talk to my husband and I about math, or Chelsea and me about math, we approach the math from completely different directions. So if to you, you're saying, okay, of my revenue, I can spend 20% on marketing and I know what my margin is going to be. The one thing we need to be very clear about is that makes the assumption that you will sell the product. So if you spend the 20%, the calculated 20%, and you don't sell the product, that's the same as my worst case scenario, right? Yeah. Idea. So I absolutely don't see a problem with that approach at all.
And I guess you just need to make sure you can afford the worst case scenario.
Exactly.
So you want to figure out what is that number that we can afford to not make money on, and not
exactly
like, up the creek kind of.
Exactly. And if you're saying, okay, let's say we do 2 cases a week for a month, give me like a ballpark number of what you think that 20% would equate to. It doesn't have to be real. Just give me a number. Like, are you going to do it over like 3 months? Or are you going to do it over a year? Like, how will you because you can't just say, okay, 2 cases a week. Like, does that make sense? My question is sort of like, how many weeks are we utilizing to set that budget?
I was kind of thinking over like a quarter, like, because the bulk of our sales for this one product, like most people are actually buying it as a cold and flu tonic, even though we don't actually sell it as one. It's an elderberry syrup. So, the bulk of our sales come between like November and March. So I think I would probably, do it over like, let's say a quarter or something like that, or like over like a 5-6 month period.
Okay, perfect. So let's say a quarter. And then, and I wanted to make sure that that was framed for people listening too, as well as myself. So you got 3 months at 2 cases a week and 20%. So give us like a ballpark of what that marketing budget would look like.
Yeah, so like maybe 150 to 200 bucks a month
Okay. So
times like
now,
however many months. Let's say
yeah.
150 a month to be conservative.
Okay. So then that gives us 15, that gives us like $450 for the quarter.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's a relatively small budget. And
Yeah.
so the question I would have to you is like, what do you want to do? How do you want to utilize it? If this is the first 3 months in a new store, do you want to spend that $450 on a discount, which is a little bit less risky because you're only spending that money in the event that you sell the product, right? So like only if they purchase the product and it gets scanned and they get the 20% off, do you actually have to spend that money? There's some other involvement in kind of setting up the discount, of course, but that's one route you could take. Or if $450 would have an impact in terms of like the print ad, right? Then you could take that route. So I love that. I love this approach because you thought about it and have a methodology. You can calculate a budget that you can work within for the first quarter. And given that budget, you can make a decision on how can my $450 have the most impact? Or how do I believe it will have the most impact? And then you're testing it.
Yeah.
And it's low risk.
Yeah, I like that. The one thing that comes to mind, like I imagine, so I get to the end of my 3-month trial, and my guess is that I'm probably actually not up to my target with the marketing alone because it takes time to build there.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm potentially looking at running at a store at like more of like a break-even point or something for a period of time if I'm investing into it.
Yes.
So the other question, and I don't know if this is kind of beyond kind of your specialty, is like, how long would you be willing to even run at a break-even point with a store to try and get that momentum going?
Yeah, so I don't know if it's willing. I think it's how long are you able, right?
Okay.
Shouting out another episode, the episode we did with Gwen on transparency and negotiations. She really talks about, okay, if we, for example, like you're not talking about free fills, but if we did a free fill and if we did 20% off, once a quarter throughout the year, what is the cost of all of my marketing across, you could do 6 months, you could do across a whole year, right? And then what is my expected sales trajectory, right? So you might be at half a case a week, half a case a week, half a case a week, 1 case a week, 1 case a week, right? Or you might be at sort of like zero and then have this, or, maybe half a case a week throughout the year and then have a big blow up, at that last quarter during cold and flu season. So you can actually run a forecast specifically for one chain of stores or for a group of new stores that you're getting into. And you're saying, okay, so let me take that $450 budget and let me run it out over the year. So now that's 450 times 4, right? So I'm just going to round and call it $2,000. So now you got $2,000 budget and you go, okay, instead of waiting and spending $2,000 like very slowly over the course of the year, I'm going to invest it more heavily in the beginning, you know what I mean? And then have some follow-up marketing. Like that can be another strategy. And you can plug that into sort of a very simple forecast to see at what point do I believe I will break even? Or better yet, how many units do I have to be selling in order for this relationship to be break even or profitable? To me, this whole conversation is really tethered to this idea of risk tolerance, right? How risk averse are you, right? Or how risk tolerant are you? And how much cash do you have to utilize or can you generate from grants and stuff to utilize, right? You want to know the worst case scenario. If I spend this $2,000 and we don't get anything in return, will my business survive? Mm-hmm. Will we be okay? Right? And that's a question that I think a lot of people don't ask that we need to be asking, because no investment is 100% like secure or going to have the exact turnout that we want. So we have to look to the alternative and go, what if this doesn't work at all?
Yeah. Do you have a course or anything where like creating that kind of prediction spreadsheet. I mean, that sounds like it makes so much sense to me.
Yeah.
And would be so valuable at this point in the game before we kind of start. What I'm thankful for is we're not launching with them until September. So we actually have a little bit of time to really think some of this stuff through.
Yeah.
And, you know, and what kind of becomes tricky there and what gets intimidating, I mean, 1 or 2 stores to put $2,000 in and not have it come back is no big deal. But we're talking about now jumping into 20 or 30 stores, right? And suddenly like 20 or 30 stores at $2,000 each and it not coming back is a big deal. A handful of stores is no big deal whatsoever, right?
Yeah. But the good thing is if you start slow, which oftentimes people don't want to do, they want to jump in, they want to go all the way, they want to like grow as fast as possible. If you start slow and you start small, you can learn from that initial $2,000 investment or even the second $2,000 investment, what is not working and what is. And then as you grow into the next, you know, group of stores or into the next area, what worked here, you can try again, and it may work, it may not, but you have then time to iterate and kind of keep trying. But I think you need to give yourself some time for trial and error. And especially if you don't have a ton of money that you can just very freely play with for marketing, you have to be super intentional and you have to really practice, you know, what works. Is it a promo or is it you know, or is it social ads? You know what I mean? And the hardest thing to do is choose. Chelsea might start giggling because we talk about this a lot, especially within our community. You have to choose and you might not choose right. And that is part of being a founder, right? And so long as you learn a lesson or you identify some metrics, right? And you can then make a better decision next time, that's all that our job really is. But to answer your question, so we don't have a tool currently that is built to do that. And here's why, and this is oftentimes why tools take a little while for us to create. When I make tools like that for my one-on-one clients, they're completely customized, right? So they're built based on like the kind of stores that the company is growing into, the kinds of promos they're thinking about doing. And in order to offer it on the Good Food CFO platform, it has to be generalized enough where anybody in any situation running any kind of promos can utilize it. So we do have the very in-depth forecasting tool, which has a trade spend calculator on it, where you can kind of play with calculations and then see how it affects your profitability. It's an advanced modeling tool. Hopefully in the future, I will find a way to create, you know, this type of model that we're talking about today in a way where like anybody can use it and apply it to their company. And I don't know, maybe we'll make some drafts and see if people want to try it out for us and tell us if it's broken or not. Maybe that's a fun feature for members, actually. Be the first to try our tools and tell us what doesn't work for you. I actually think that's a great idea.
Beta testing.
Beta tester for sure.
Amazing. I love that. Okay. Well, cool.
I really want to dive into the numbers the next few months because we haven't necessarily been strong in that. And it seems essential with this next step.
Yeah.
We do have access to potential capital, but we're really hesitant to want to take on too much of debt, just feeling like we don't really, you know.
Yeah.
I'm saying we don't know what we're doing. Like we have 8 years of experience. Like we kind of do know what we're doing, but then we also know we don't know what we don't know, right?
Yeah. And you're stepping into something totally new. And I think it's so great to be hearing this from you because I venture to guess, and I think I'm right, that there's a lot of listeners right now who are like, no one wants to make a mistake. Everyone wants to spend money and have it produce the results that we want. And it's not great to hear, like, you're just going to have to make a decision, right? Make that choice and give it a try and see if it works out or not. As I said before, you're already doing some good work and that you're thinking about, okay, how does this make sense to me? How do I want to go about trying to make my first budget for marketing? I love the way you thought about that 20% that you think you can kind of give away, if you will, you know, to invest in marketing. And I think, you know, a lot of people don't do that. So I think congratulating you, it sounds funny to do, but like, I really am proud of you for doing that work. And I hope that people listening feel encouraged to do it as well. Even if you don't get it 100% right, you are doing the work to be able to learn from whatever choice you make and then create a better outcome, you know, in the future, if necessary, which is really, really cool. I also think that you're going to figure it out, and we're here to kind of guide you and give you the tools necessary to kind of put the numbers where they need to go. And, I welcome you to like our CFO office hours. If you want to join us there, I think it's a great place, over a 4-week time frame. You come in with the numbers you have now, we interface about it. Okay, here are the next steps I would recommend for you. You go away for the week. You kind of start building out that model or that template. And you know what? If you join us there, that's also a great place for you to kind of beta test a new tool. We actually did that with the cash flow projector. Now that I'm thinking about it, we had a group of CFO office hours folks who were the first to beta test our cash flow projector before we launched it. But it's a great place to get that kind of feedback as well. So that's for you. And then of course, anybody else listening, like the reason we offer that is so we can go beyond this level of conversation and see what are the numbers you're talking about, Chris, right? What does 20% look like? What are your revenue and your cash flow numbers truly? And it's a safe space to do that and really kind of solidify action that you can then take. And then you can come back again in 3 months and let us know how it worked out, in the office hours or the podcast.
Awesome. Yeah. I was wondering about the office hours. So thanks for kind of giving a bit of an explanation of what that looks like. So it sounds like it is kind of a working party, and whoever is signed up, they all have like their 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever, where you dive into their stuff. And
yeah. So we max it out at 5 people. So that would be like, what is it? Like 8 minutes per person, but currently, as we're recording this, we've never exceeded 4 people, which is beautiful because it's a solid 15 minutes. And 15 minutes might not sound like a lot, but we get a lot done in that 15 minutes of dedicated time where we're looking at your numbers. We're really talking through things. And then we always go a little bit extra because the other folks that are in the office hours, they are going to have a comment or supporting words or an experience that they want to share with you and vice versa, which is really, really cool. So we always leave a little bit of time, for feedback from the other members. Awesome. And I want to say that if our office hours, just for people listening, if they ever do grow beyond like 5 people wanting to sign up in a particular month, we will add additional times to that. We haven't ever really said that publicly, but just we have 1 time offered now. And as that maxes out, then we'll add more times. Anything else you want to talk about, Chris?
But it's probably good. I feel like I could just keep asking questions all day long. We could probably do it there. There was a lot of value in that already.
Okay, I'm glad.
Reach out to you folks about some other potential support with next steps. So
awesome. Well, we appreciate you coming to hang out with us during a thunderstorm, which it appears to have passed. It has gotten a lot sunnier.
You've got some light now.
But it's not rumbling as much. So
good.
That's all natural light coming in through the window.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us. This is fun. We're going to be doing more of these. We're excited to have you as a BABOYOT member, and we'll definitely be checking in, and we'll let you know when we've got new tools to beta test. I'm leaning into that. I think that's a good idea.
I think it's awesome.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And it's so helpful to have people to actually talk about the numbers. It's something we didn't do for the first so many years of our business. And as we're growing, I'm like, wow, this makes so much sense and is alleviating some of the nervousness I have. So thank you.
Oh, good.
I love
You're
that.
so welcome. Yeah. Do you want to do a little shout out, like where people might be able to find you on social or your website if they want to learn more about your products, potential collaborations, something like that?
Oh yeah. Awesome. At Wild Muskoka. Muskoka is a region of Ontario, but at Wild Muskoka is our Instagram, and we do all kinds of stuff on there. So if you're interested in foraging, come check us out. wildmuskoka.com is the website.
Yeah, I've looked at your website, Chris, and you've got some really cool products on there.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
We want to thank Chris and all of our BABOYOT members who submitted questions for today's episode. If you'd like to join us for our next Ask the Good Food CFO episode, become a BABOYOT member. Your BABOYOT membership is a direct investment in this podcast and our goals to create a more equitable and vibrant food industry, as well as helping us keep this podcast ad-free. And you're going to get access to some great benefits along the way, like our full library of bonus content, a highlight of your brand here on the podcast, and the ability to beta test our tools before we release them. So if you want to learn more about becoming a BABOYOT member, visit thegoodfoodcfo.com and click on membership.
Thank you for joining us here today. If you enjoyed this episode or found it helpful or inspiring in any way, please share it with your founder friends on social and rate and review the podcast wherever you listen. It's the #1 way to help good food founders find the show. We'll be back with a brand new episode next week.